Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders who are changing how the world lives, works, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is our monthly expert on innovation, Sean Ammirati. Sean, who is with Birchmere Venture Capitals, also a professor of business at Carnegie Mellon University. Sean's been a serial entrepreneur and author, and also has his own podcast now. Sean, welcome back. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
So, Sean, the monthly topic that you come on to share with us is about Ammirati on innovation. One of the things that I know caught your eye was from last month's episode, you know, when you were talking about big companies need to understand when to buy, when to build, when to partner. Microsoft drops $1 billion into OpenAI. What did you make of that one, Sean?
Yeah, and I think it's easy to think like, well, it's Microsoft, you know, is this just a token investment? But I would just remind everybody, $1 billion, no matter how big the company is a big investment. And so a week ago, as of when we're recording this, Microsoft and OpenAI announced this this joint initiative, which they call AGI, and I'll sort of unpack this in a minute. But you know, most people think of OpenAI, I think, overly as just, well, that's the thing Elon Musk gave some money to, that's a nonprofit around AI. And certainly, I saw even a number of popular, you know, business news outlets kind of use Elon Musk as the picture around the press release that they did. But it's a much bigger thing than that, right? It's this general artificial intelligence group that I think is really pushing how people think about, you know, the future of automation and AI as it starts to push up the spectrum of what it can accomplish. And, you know, the CTO of OpenAI, who's also the chairman of the board, when he did his blog post that announced it, you know, I thought it was interesting what he chose to focus on. So he said, you know, Microsoft's putting $1 billion into OpenAI to support what we're doing, right? And he kind of goes through that. But then it's the second part of it that I think is interesting. He says that his second sentence is, we're partnering to develop a hardware and software platform within Microsoft Azure, which will scale to AGI. We'll jointly develop a new Azure AI supercomputing technologies, and Microsoft will become our exclusive. And again, that's not a word that's PR people let in without somebody talking about it. Right? So they're going to become the exclusive. So, you know, if you're Amazon, my guess is that sent some smoke signals up. They're going to become their exclusive cloud provider. So we'll be working hard together to further extend Microsoft Azure's capabilities into large-scale AI systems. And I think this is really interesting on a couple levels, right? So there's, first of all, just what's this going to do from the cloud perspective, right? And you know, we had a good conversation last month about this build, partner, buy, and the strange bedfellows that were Microsoft and Oracle. And just how you need to take a customer-centric view of the partnerships that you're doing. But we talked about that there's also there's no one-size-fits-all recipe for how to attack these things, right? And so it's very tempting to say, like, well, is the right thing to do for us to have just go out and be partner-only, or go out and do everything internal? And I think the right answer is an and, not an or, right? And you need to think about how to do it. And so you want to do multiples of these things. But I think something that we probably didn't hit on as heavily as in hindsight we should have, and then Microsoft helpfully came through and gave us this news event as a jumping off point here, is corporate venture capital as part of this overall technique. So I think when people think about corporate venture capital, they miss the boat a lot on the benefits that can be driven inside the organization as it relates to these growth topics. And I actually think, you know, this is the second time that Microsoft's taken a big swing in the CVC space that I'm aware of. And the last time it was Facebook, for perspective, right? So many people remember Facebook was in some challenging financial situations, and Microsoft came up with an investment that really kept them going. And now here they are again around AI and artificial intelligence, which I think is arguably as big a wave in computing and how technology is going to evolve, just like social was when Microsoft made the Facebook investment.
Yeah, Sean, there's a lot to that, right? And I think when you mentioned some of these points, like the people missing the boat on what the corporate venture capital is, right? Is that, do you see this as something that was just sort of a one-off, or is there more broadly a blind spot that some companies are confronting with this? And how, if so, how do they get around it?
Yeah, so I think there's different ways that corporate venture capital programs get set up, but I think first of all, it's worth saying there are a lot of work to set up correctly. I had on just not a commercial, but just as a point of reference, I had on my podcast a week ago, the founder of Touchdown Ventures, which is a group that literally companies jointly hire to do corporate venture capital together. Because for every Intel Capital out there that has a great team of people doing it, there's a lot of teams where they just don't have the full staff they need to do. And I think the one really common failure point is these guys kind of dip their toe in the water trying to pretend to do it, or they make, whereas you need to have infrastructure to actually do this well, know how to structure the deals. I think tech companies in general are better than the average large industrial company at doing that. But the other part of it is that you should have a solid answer to the question, what's my advantage to doing these investments relative to the other capital sources that entrepreneurs have to work with? To give credit to somebody that I think a lot of people on your podcast will be familiar with, Salesforce has done a really good job of this. If you actually look at Salesforce Ventures portfolio, what you'll see is they've made very smart SMB SaaS investments in places where the Salesforce kind of operating system, marketplace, enterprise knowledge make their check more valuable than just the dollars that they're writing. And at Birchmere, we've had them invest in 2 of our portfolio companies over the last 5 years, and they've done a really good job being more than just capital. So 1, it takes work. 2, there should be a strategy around it. And 3, I think it should drive your over the horizon growth, right? This should not just be for making, a small IRR, but it should be for helping you think what's coming down, what's in the future. Obviously I don't know this, and they've never really done anything explicitly to do anything but be helpful to our companies. But I am sure in all that help that Salesforce is providing the 2 companies that they work with, it's also informing how Salesforce thinks about some of these emerging topics. And I'm sure in the same way, the Microsoft investment in OpenAI, even though at a much larger scale, is going to inform how Azure thinks about this next wave of computing, which is this sort of automation and more general purpose AI that's going to be so critical to enterprise IT over the next handful of years here.
Yeah, Sean, that's a great perspective, and very valuable, as you said there. So I want to come back to this AGI topic.
Yeah.
And you said a minute ago that you were going to unpack it a bit, but let me offer this perspective. So this is from OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman. So when the Microsoft and OpenAI announced this, here is the quote from CEO Sam Altman: "The creation of AGI will be the most important technological development in human history, with the potential to shape the trajectory of humanity." Okay, Sean Ammirati, venture capitalist. You hear that? What do you think?
Well, so one thing I think that's worth saying is that Sam is not somebody you want to bet against. So for people who don't know who that is, more people would be familiar with Sam in the context of the work he's done at YCombinator, which is, I think, you can argue, but I think most everybody would acknowledge that the best run tech accelerator out there, at least in terms of portfolio performance. There are other people I think who do just as good of work, but accelerators are a lot like business schools. Those who end up at the top of the rankings get the best students, which helps them stay at the top of the rankings in the business schools, and the accelerators that end up at the top of the ranking get the best entrepreneurs, which helps them stay at the top of the rankings there. And YC has been at the top of the rankings for a long time. So even if you're not familiar with Y Combinator, you're certainly familiar with their companies, Dropbox, Airbnb. They have done a great job creating great companies there. So he's not somebody you want to bet against here. But my instinct is that really what he is reflecting on as it relates to OpenAI, right, is less even the entity OpenAI, which is a complicated entity to get your hands around because it's got this nonprofit element to it. It's got this for-profit element to it. They raised a lot of money from lots of tech kind of luminaries, which is, I think, the why you see people referencing back to the Elon Musk so much and the gift that he gave on the front end of it. And now they've got this AGI thing that's going to be kind of for profit. And you can even see journalists trying to wrap their arms around it. But I think really, to me, the part that my guess is that Sam was driving at as he made that quote, and I don't want to speak for him, but just if I were to take a shot at it, my sense is that what he's really driving at is that we have very significantly, even the people who are the most optimistic, we have very significantly underestimated how transformative it's going to be when we start automating and providing artificial intelligence to tasks that seem unautomatable. You know, it's amazing, given where I sit as a VC, to meet with these different AI companies that are doing things that literally would have seemed too speculative to make a science fiction novel 20 years ago. And now it's not like, oh yeah, maybe that would work. It's like, here, let me show you the prototype of how this works, right? Now, some of those are going to be commercializable, you know, in the next couple of years. Some of them are a little further down the road. But if you look out just a little further than, you know, quarter to quarter or even year to year, I think it's hard to dispute that we'll be automating more and more of what we do with these AI systems, and that the integration of people who are really good at doing artificial intelligence, which the OpenAI team is, with someone like Microsoft, who's really good at scaling that computing capacity to lots and lots of organizations. Like, I wouldn't want to bet against, you know, the transformation that comes on the back end of that. And I think it continues to be, you know, I don't want to make this Ammirati on Microsoft, because I feel like we're talking a lot about Microsoft these last couple episodes here, but I think it continues to reinforce this shift that the team at Microsoft has done from a business to consumer company to a business to business company, where this OpenAI plus Azure feels more like Intel Inside for the AI world than it does, you know, something that end consumers are kind of even conscious is happening, because people will pick this capability up, integrate it into their solutions, and it will just be magic to the end customer, business or consumer.
Yeah. Well, Sean, we're going to move off Microsoft in a second here, but I did want to ask you one other thing about that, right? Because, you know, it's a little bit of a cliche, but leaders lead. And Microsoft, as you've just described here, has gone through a pretty rapid and profound evolution. Then you add in something like their willingness to not only be open to a partnership with Oracle, but to drive that and to get Oracle to come in with them, to look at somebody like OpenAI and says, well, we probably could buy them. We probably could try to get the people in our labs to develop something like this. But they said the better approach is, let's take a third way. Let's do a partnership here. Yeah. Let's do an investment here. And, you know, when you think about the point you just made about Intel Inside, is this yet another new go-to-market approach that Microsoft is willing to take? Because as we talked about, I think they're doing as well in their go-to-market and their customer engagement approaches as they are on the technology side. It's just been that nothing is closed. Everything's open to what's available to them. And I think more and more, every technology company, and sort of by extension, every company that's now in some other industry but is moving more into technology, they've got to be thinking as much about their go-to-market plans, customer engagement plans, business models, innovation models, as they are about the technology they're developing.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you covered the industry when it happened, when Intel did it, but my sense is that the competence that they had around doing partnerships with who were the large tech companies at that point is what allowed Intel to execute the Intel Inside strategy so well. And so to me, what I think is remarkable, and you said it well, leaders lead. I mean, Satya has led well, and I think led clearly, which is a big part of it. We're going to take a very different approach, because the things that got Microsoft to where it was when he showed up there, namely, you know, really good consumer brand and the ability to build consumer tech well, were not going to be the things that got Microsoft to where it wanted to be, which was namely, you know, a much larger enterprise than it, you know, in terms of value, in terms of market cap, than it was when he showed up. And you can kind of watch him tick things off, whether it's by LinkedIn or partnerships with Oracle, or now a partnership with OpenAI. the competence in the organization that he's built. I mean, it's been a case study really in how leaders come in and enable change inside the organization, not try to just create it, but really enable it. So I'm excited to see what they do from here. I'm excited to see, how they continue to broaden our definitions of a lot of these things. I mean, I guess a related point on this that you and I were chatting about a little bit before we started hitting record here, right, is also, I think they're also reframing for us what is and what is not cloud computing. And you've been on the front of this, Bob. So, I mean, your Cloud Wars rankings have been, I think, doing a nice job articulating this for people. But in the last earnings call, right off the bat, he's like, we are the largest cloud computing company in there. And people are like, whoa, you don't have as many servers, running microprocessors in somebody else's cloud. And that's the only definition of cloud. And it's like, well, I mean, there's this guy, you might have heard of him. He's a little bit of personality, named Mark Benioff. He built this company. You may or may not have heard of it. We've already mentioned him twice in this episode called Salesforce. Is that cloud revenue or not? I think his island would imply that it is, right? So these guys are doing well. And I think Microsoft, it's really amazing. I remember years ago being at a tech conference with a bunch of Microsoft executives and asking them like, well, why do you work at Microsoft? And this was right in the middle of the Ballmer years of running Microsoft. And not one of them could actually give me an honest answer for why they were there. My instinct is, fast forward to 2019, if we're in that same W hotel in San Francisco having, a couple drinks and asking like, hey, why do you work at Microsoft? They'd have a very articulate answer to what that is. And I think it's this kind of reframing the mission and vision of Microsoft for where they want to go, not where they are here.
Yeah, Sean, two things. If I tie that in with a point that you were making about cloud and is it only infrastructure? Is it only infrastructure and platform? And grudgingly, Salesforce, or not Salesforce, software as a service is or isn't, right? Whatever industry somebody's in today, and if we reflect back on some of the things Salesforce has done, some of the things Microsoft has done, what you're describing in corporate venture capital, and the need to look at things differently and in multiple dimensions simultaneously, right? That there are this tendency to still have among a lot of business people, somebody brings an idea to you, let's do $1 billion investment in this company over here that could really change how things play out for us over the next few years. It's like, no, we don't do that. We don't do partnerships, or we don't do this. And that was perhaps fine in a more static, slow change environment. But the way things are moving today, I think that the willingness or the stubbornness of some executives to say that's not what we do. And, we've all got to have some limits, but for large part, you got to do whatever you need to do to stay relevant and interesting and valuable and compelling to customers, not to try to perpetuate some history that happens to have brought you to this point.
Right. And the key word there is to customers.
Yeah.
Right. Like to stay relevant and interesting to customers, not to stay relevant and interesting to Wall Street, because it turns out, over longer than, your next quarterly earnings estimate, what's interesting to Wall Street is what's interesting to your customers, and not what's interesting to just your employees. Because it turns out that, technologists and employees are smart, right? They want to work on things that touch lots and lots of people's lives. And so what's interesting to your customers is what's interesting to them. And now what's interesting to the senior management team that's kind of who got you to where you are. Because again, people, I believe, ultimately, when you unpack it, they know that they want to be part of an organization that's winning and that's growing. And the way that you do that is you use customers as your ground truth. Like it's interesting because on one hand, that feels complicated. On the other hand, like it's super simple. I feel like my 9-year-old son could understand that, right? Like, hey, here's what you need to focus on, Michael. Build something that people want, and then they will in turn do more of that with you. Like it's not rocket science, but like we overcomplicate it by trying to, make it this, oh man, there's like a science project to it. And it's not that. It's simple. Like it's gotta be what's interesting to your customers.
Yeah. You build, if Michael had ever, put up a lemonade stand, right. And he would know if you make lemonade that's warm and there's way too much sugar or not enough, it doesn't taste good, it's not going to happen. But you get it really good, boy, isn't that amazing? People come back, they love it.
That's right.
And Sean, the way things are flying today, I think the business customer's view of the cloud is any of these sorts of things. They don't, I mean, at some level, somebody's going to have to know all the details. But the bigger thing that those business executives thinking about with cloud is how can I move faster, get closer to customers, shorten my product development cycle, bring more revenue into the company, bring better people into the company. And this idea that some people still in the tech industry have of, this is cloud and that isn't, your Mark Benioff example. Anyhow, everybody's entitled to his or her own opinion. I hope that one, though, however, starts to go away, because it's not doing anybody any good, and it continues to confound things. And I see so many of the media reports these days saying, Microsoft's Azure revenue growth slowed to only 64%, and without taking into, it did slow, that's a fact. But what happens when you get a bigger and bigger business, and what is that relative to other things? And always trying to say, well, is that as big as AWS? And I think on the other front, what some of these companies, all these big tech cloud companies are doing, Sean, is trying to, how much of that cloud spectrum can I get into for my company so that I can be more interesting to, more relevant to, and more valuable to customers? Not trying to get into the hyperscaler business, but those other parts. They know they need to cover as much of the landscape as they can to be able to do a better and better and better job for customers.
Yeah. And I got to be honest, I have not really gone through and combed through the earnings numbers like you probably have. But to me, the aggregate revenue number feels like just lazy reporting to me. And I love journalists. I had a couple of years where I was COO of a media company. I think journalists do really important work, but sometimes they're humans too. And I think that there's often an easy story, which is like take the number at the top of the income statement, see what it was last time, and what has revenue gone up or down. Like, all revenue is not created equally, right? And I think it's a more complicated story. And again, I haven't done it, so I don't know where Microsoft nets out or doesn't net out here. But my instinct is that there are parts of the Microsoft revenue number that are much less valuable than other parts. And I don't know what the growth rates are on different components of it, but that's the much more, if I were trying to make a rational argument on, buying or selling Microsoft, to me, like, that's the more interesting thing, because there is different revenue that comes along with different, different multiples that you should apply against it, different value in terms of where your business is heading in the future. And my sense is that's far more important. And then, as you say, there is just the law of large numbers. Like, as numbers go up, it gets harder and harder to hit the same growth rate that you did before. And that, even, to use math that's much less controversial and that most people on this podcast will be familiar with, when you think about an emerging SaaS business, right? So at the stage that we invest with them, right, we talk about a race to between 1 and 2 million annualized revenue, right? And we want to be doing that much, much faster than any of the heuristics after that. So we're measuring that month to month and saying, like, hey, are you growing north of 20%, month over month, or on a compound basis, if a quarter's the right unit, on a quarterly basis, are you compounding 20% month over month? And then once you get between 1 million and 2 million, you want to triple it, the next year, triple it again, and then double it after that, right? Well, the reason it's not triple is because it turns out that, like, you get north of 10 million and you get north of 20 million and north of 30 million. At some point, like, tripling just becomes a much higher hurdle. And obviously, Microsoft has a lot more zeros on their aggregate revenue. And I have not, to be transparent, gone through and combed through their earnings statement. But I think certainly the numbers are much, much larger. That's part of it. And also, there's a bunch of different business units in that. And some of those business units are really valuable. Some of those are probably more legacy. After our conversation last time, Bob, one of the things I kept thinking about constantly for about a week afterwards is, like, hey, like, should Microsoft get rid of Bing? Like, and I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but if I think about, like, what are parts of the business that are very much indicative of where they're heading versus what are parts of the business that are indicative of where they were before, Bing, to me, without the benefit of sitting in the C-suite and understanding all the things that Microsoft's trying to do, Bing to me feels like very much the old Microsoft, not the new Microsoft. Yet if it were spun out as a standalone company, it'd be a great way for someone on Wall Street to buy a pure play search entity, because there aren't a lot of pure play search entities. I mean, if you want to buy Google, you've also got to buy an autonomous vehicle unit, and you know, he's doing a good job, but you got to buy Thomas's Google Cloud part of it, and you've got to buy, you know, Google Shopping, there's just a bunch of other stuff you got to buy along with search. You know, Microsoft could conceptually spin out Bing, have a very, you know, pure play, this is what's happening in search advertising. It seems like it stayed, you know, single digit percentages, but that's single digit percentages of search are meaningful percentage. You know, that's a meaningful revenue number, and it'd be a way for Wall Street to buy that, and maybe even furthermore help Microsoft stay focused on the business they're trying to build. I don't know if that's right or not, but it just, to me, it more illustrates this point that there's parts of revenue on the income statement for Microsoft that are really relevant to where they're heading. If I were an analyst, they're the things or a journalist, they're the things I'd really focus on. And there are other parts of it that probably are not. And that's not just Microsoft, that's any of these large enterprise tech companies today.
So, Sean, fascinating ideas there. And, you know, we'll have to talk later and get that list of people who are looking to buy Google. That'd be a fun list.
But I mean Wall Street. So like if Wall Street's, if you're on Fidelity for your own personal 401k, and you say like, hey, I believe search advertising is only going to be a more valuable thing. And so I want to basically index search advertising. What's the security that you buy? What's the stock that you buy to bet on that trend? The challenge is there's no real stock you can buy that's a pure play, on that macro trend. If you want to buy social, there's a company called Facebook that's a pretty good proxy for social advertising. There's not the equivalent in search. That was the point I tried to.
Sure. No, you got it, Sean. Hey, last thing before you go. In light of a lot of these sort of big, you know, powerful trends that we've been talking about here, when you meet with, the founders of some of these small companies, high growth companies like that, how do you talk to them about what they need to be, how they need to sort of engage with the outside world or think about the outside world today, right? Because on the one hand, they're so incredibly focused on building a great product and a great company, but then how do you advise them to link that into all these incredible things going on in the big world right now?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you sort of walk and chew gum, that you do both of those at the same time, right? So you don't have a business if you don't have a product that delights your customers, just period. So if you have not yet figured out how to delight your customers, then everything else is noise. Mark Andreessen years ago coined a term called product market fit, where he talked about having a product that satisfies a group of customers, where that group of customers is large enough that a viable business can be built. And his argument, which I generally agree with, is that basically until you achieve product market fit, there's really not much else that you should be focusing on as an entrepreneur. So in concept, I agree with that. On the other hand, I think it's also important, again, this is the walk and chew gum thing, to understand how the things that you're doing fit into a larger narrative. Because the really important question I think for entrepreneurs to ask while they're making sure they're delighting their customers is, if this business is successful, how large ultimately could it be? And how large it ultimately can be is typically how that fits into this sort of larger framework or thesis. And I think that's where storytelling and things that people often don't think of as, you know, startup talents become really important, because you want to show that, like, yes, I'm delighting these 100 customers today, but to steal a Jeffrey Moore, that delight is going to knock over a bunch of other bowling pins, and ultimately that becomes a really big business together. Yeah. And when you're telling the story, you want to do both. You want to say, like, look, let me show you how valuable this solution is to the customers that I'm satisfying today, as well as, you know, and that's going to set me up well to be part of this mega trend that's undeniable, you know, AI, autonomous vehicles, whatever the narrative is that your startup fits into.
Well, Sean, thanks. That's a good perspective. And I think about that a lot. So many things at play right now. We talked about this need for leaders to lead, and they've got to be able to play the big scale, the big companies, partner, buy, build, sell. How do they engage with some of these other folks? How do they think about doing stuff they've never done before and avoiding this notion of getting sealed into this place of saying, well, that's just not what we do. It's a challenging time right now. Sean, any final words?
I think it is challenging, but it's also exciting, right? Like, I mean, if you're sitting in one of these boardrooms today, right, you have a chance to really make the future. And so, these guys, they need to, I think Microsoft's a good example of this, but certainly not the other one. These guys need to actually think about, like, how am I going to make the future so that 10, 20, 30 years from now, when I'm finishing up my professional career, it's like, look, these are the things I did that transformed the world and that I'm proud to have been a part of. And there's certainly, a bunch of mega trends that are going to change the world and opportunities for companies to fit into this work. So challenge, but with challenge comes great opportunity. And I think these guys have some really exciting opportunities in front of them.
Sean, that's great. Perfect tagline there for Ammirati on Innovation is board member, you really have a chance to make the future. That's a good one, Sean. Thanks so much, Sean. As always, it's a blast. Great to get your insights.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Hope to see you next time. Thanks again.